Welcome to Beard of Darkness Book Reviews. I'm so excited, guys. I can see you in the chat. First off, though, the guest of honor, Tad Williams. How are you tonight, my friend?
I'm doing very well, Matthew, and I was enjoying the intro music there, the Cookie Monster vocals, the whole thing. Yeah, all good.
Man, I have a buddy. He's a self-pub author, DB Rook. His name's Daryl. That's his band, Terminal Sun, and he did the intro for me. I was like, all right.
Oh yeah, I like the name. Yeah, one of my dearest old friends is in a band called Short Fuse, which is like speed metal and the whole bit. And so yeah, it's all good.
I'm a drummer, man, and that speed metal is a workout.
I'll bet. I'll bet. I've only ever played the slower kind of rock and roll music. So, and I was never a drummer. That's always the hardest part.
Man, it is so fun. But it's funny that we kind of started off kind of chatting about music because, wow, what an influence I know I have. You know, when it comes to anything creative, I think every section of creativity, whether it's painting, watercolors, music, reading, writing, poetry, just kind of set a fire into me. So what I wanted to start first is I'm going to give it a little bit of an introduction. I hope I do okay with it. The author with over 17 million copies sold. Wow, that's a big number, dude. 13 award nominations. That's incredible. So 17 million copies sold, 13 award nominations. Would you expand? So what I mean by expand is tell us a little bit about yourself, something maybe personal as far as your everyday to-day life, what you do, maybe that your readers don't necessarily know about you.
Well, I'm not sure there's too much hidden. Well, from the readers, yeah, but I've been doing a reading thing since the pandemic began back in 2019. And I wind up filling many minutes each time I do that with lots of chit chat about what's going on around the household. So I'm not sure how secret any of it is anymore, but basically my wife, Deborah, and I, who used to be my British publisher, Deborah and I live in the Santa Cruz area in California, and we're up in the hills surrounded by trees, which is how we like it because we both work from home. And that's where we pretty much are most of the time. And we have, pets. Of course, we're animal people, both inside and outside the house. We're really into the local flora and fauna, but we also have 2 dogs and 2 cats.
I hear there's a banana slug, Tad.
There are many banana slugs. That's one of the fine parts about living in the Santa Cruz area. In fact, the UC Santa Cruz, University of California, Santa Cruz team name is the Fighting Banana Slugs. So
really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, if you ever in this area, we'll take you out and get you a souvenir T-shirt. It's
so cool.
Official logo. For those of you who don't know what a banana slug is, they're about yay long. I'm trying to get the proportions right here. They're about 6 to 9 inches long, and they are bright yellow, and they're giant slugs. But they're calm, peaceful creatures. They won't do you any harm, and we love them around here because you can see them from blocks away. They're very cool.
What do they bring? If you're privy to it, and if I feel like you probably are, what do they bring to the environment? What kind of things do they pros like? What do they bring?
Slugs basically, as far as I know, banana slugs and other slugs break down stuff in the same way that, say, earthworms do, although I don't think they necessarily channel all the dirt straight through themselves like earthworms do. But my understanding is that they break down organic matter in the environment. So they are, yeah, absolutely. They're part of the circle of life, as it were. And like most things that we get either grossed out by or annoyed by, they actually have a purpose. There's only a few things that, as far as I'm concerned, don't. Mosquitoes and ticks, obviously, I'm not real thrilled with. There are a few screw flies, but other than that, everything's got, some use in the environment. So,
you ever heard of a bug called the love bug?
Yeah, actually, I think I have.
Weird. It's engineered in a lab, and then it took over Florida. So they call it the love bug because their butts are connected, right? And they're trying to fly in 2 different ways. So when they hit your windshield, it looks like a heart.
Oh my God!
Very odd.
There's a metaphor waiting to be used on something. I'll have to think it over.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, I'm right there with you. Oh, what's going on, John? Man, it's good to see you, brother, from Talking Story. Wonderful channel, my guy. Have read Otherlands and love some Bobby Dollar. I have Dragonbone Chair on the stack to start soon. Oh, brother, you can't start it soon enough, man. It just does it checks every box for me. And it's one of those books, and we'll talk about it more, that I was like, I can't believe that this didn't fall in my lap sooner. I'd heard so much about you and your work, and being a part of the Broken Binding subscription that was, just sent to me.
Yeah.
Not just, but, introducing and giving me that opportunity to just boom, just go off. And it just it's all the tropes right from the rip just hit me right in the heart. So I'm absolutely digging my journey with Tad Williams prose.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So you're a family man, I hear.
I am, and not surprising because I was raised by a very close family. And hello, Luis from Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico. Sí, perdóname. Puerto Rico es el pronunciación correcto. But anyway, I was raised in a very close family. I got two brothers who live in the area. My wife, Deborah, and I have two biological kids, and then we semi-adopted. I say semi because we brought them in when they were already 18 years old, so it wasn't a legal adoption, but they were two friends of the family that needed a place, so we kind of brought them in too. So we think of ourselves as having four kids. And to be quite honest with you, and this is not a sentimental thing, I mean, back many years ago, I remember when Deborah and I were first thinking of getting pregnant. You know Michael Whalen, of course, the wonderful fantasy artist and all that stuff. And I was having a conversation with Michael about something, and the subject of planning for kids came up and all that. And Michael said, with all the things that I've done in my life, there's still basically two parts of my life. The part where I didn't have kids yet, and then the part after I had kids. As you know, being a dad yourself, that, and I'm sure your wife feels the same way. I know Deborah does. It's absolutely true. And without wanting to make it sound like, haha, we know something you don't, to people who haven't had kids or may never have kids, sure. It's one of these things that it's not just the physical everything, the exhaustion, the stuff we were just talking about, but it's also that it changes your brain in a number of ways. It changes your outlook on the entire universe. You suddenly realize at a deep, visceral, or even deeper level, genetic maybe, I am no longer the leading edge of this bloodline. It's like, it's like I am no longer the center of the universe, as you can feel when you're, a kid having a decent life. But once you have your own kids, you go, I am now standing to the side, and my job is now to help them go forward, hopefully to a better world, or at least as good a world as, we have given them. So it's a major change of your whole kind of, your whole way of looking at the universe and reality and everything. And that you can never quite explain to anybody until it happens to them. It's like falling in love, it's like, oh, that's what they were talking about, right?
Yes. And there's just like, there's every example and cliche or whatever somebody brings you, your grandparents, your parents, your friends, they're like, this is what it's like. This is what it's like. Prepare for this. And you're right. I think it takes that emotional certainty, if that makes any sense. Like, I know driving away from the hospital with my first son. In fact, my dad was driving away. We had him in the back. We were living with my dad at the time.
Right.
And even then, like, I didn't have a mortgage. The car was like, I didn't have a car payment. Even then, knowing that they're allowing me to take this baby home with me, it's like, hold on. This has now become real. And it doesn't feel real until the moment you're holding that baby and that life is in your hands.
Yeah, well, that is certainly true for almost every dad I've ever met. I suspect it's a bit different for the women who've been carrying the baby around in their womb for months and months. I think
more natural, right?
Well, they develop that. I mean, they're literally sharing, blood and bodily fluids and hormones and everything. But no, absolutely. And I was an older parent. We had our first kid. I was 40. And, but even so, coming back, and I was driving in that case, coming back from the hospital with our firstborn son. Yeah. That feeling of, oh my God, I am solely, my wife and we are solely responsible for this little human being. And just driving excuse me, just driving 10 miles across town in the middle of the day, with no particular hazards or anything. It was suddenly this like heart clutching thing, like, please don't let anybody run a red light, and
don't make me get out of this car.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And just the whole responsibility that had just dropped on me, like a parachute. I had just landed and the parachute comes down. Same thing. So yeah, no, absolutely.
I love that. The parachute analogy, that metaphor, whatever it is. I'm not good at it, deciphering between the two, but that was great. I love that. It's blanketing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's wonderful. And I like that you touched on that. You were an older dad or whatever, because I'm in similar. I wasn't 40. In fact, I'm not 40 yet, but I've considered myself a little bit of an older dad, not having my first until I was 30.
Yeah,
29, 30, something like that. Now I'm thankful for that. I know me at 21, there's no way. Like, thank you, God, for giving me those kids when I was a little bit more mature. Not much, but a little.
A little bit, yeah. No, absolutely. I felt the same way at the time. I think I would have been a much more wrapped up in hierarchy and discipline and things like that when I was younger, just in the sense that young males tend to be more worried about, I have to make sure they know, who's in charge and who's, and, whereas as I got older, I just became more flexible. And when, my kids were 2 or 4 or whatever, and we're going, no, instead of me going, oh, this is me personally being put on the spot, I was like, okay, this is a small child trying to make something happen in the only universe they understand, which is the family unit. And there must be a better way to get through this particular, blockage than just yelling or saying, because I said so, or I'm sure you're dealing with all of these things.
I'm still right in the middle of that, because I'll tend to yell sometimes instead of get up and actually make the actions happen. And my wife will, thankfully, she'll tell me, hold on, I don't think that was the right way. So I'm going through that.
Yeah.
Where it's like my dad kind of did those things to me. And now trying to be a better parent, not that he was a bad parent, he was a great parent, but just trying to evolve and become better as, we all grow as a family. I totally respect that, man.
Absolutely. No, I mean, my parents were great. My parents were lovely people. We just lost them a couple of years ago, both of them. And I'm still dealing with it, obviously.
I can't imagine.
But the only reason I mention it is because, there's some things I do differently than they do. And part of it is because it's a different era. Part of it is because my circumstances are different than theirs were. But the fact is, it's no shame on them. They did a great job. And here's the other cliche that everybody who's gone through this knows. I didn't understand how hard what they were doing was at the time that I was the test subject. I was the oldest.
Comes around, right?
Absolutely. I was the oldest. No, I'll tell you one thing really quickly, which is that actually with our firstborn child, we had one of those nights where he was sick at both ends of his body. Right. All parents know this one. It was like stuff was spouting out both ends every time I'd clean him up, because it was my job that night, because I think we were still breastfeeding at some time. But anyway, Deborah finally had gotten to go to sleep. It was her turn to get some sleep. So I was up dealing with it, and it happened 3-4 times, and by about the 4th time, I like cleaned him up from scratch and re-diapered him and the whole thing, and all trying to keep, he wasn't feeling well. So, you can't get angry with him. And I literally called my mom up at what must have been 3 or 4 in the morning and just said, Mom, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
I never understood how much you probably wanted to put me in a wastebasket when I was this age and just roll me down the front steps. God bless you for not giving up on us. And she went, I
think there's a beautiful
boy's giving you trouble tonight, huh?
Yes. I think there's a beautiful point, though, when I've said it to my mom and dad, basically exactly the way you just said it. It's like once a mom and dad and a son and daughter, whatever it is, have that connection, that they both realize that, hey, now you knew what I was dealing with, and I know what you're dealing with. Now we can kind of connect even further.
Absolutely.
Man, I love that. This has been one of my favorite openings ever, because it just is at the heart of who I hope to be as a man. And
well, you sound like you're well on the way, Matthew. All of your strategies sound like good ones. So I have no worries about the future of your family.
Thank you so much. I had to say, Enoch 1524. Wow, thank you so much. I'm very humbled by that. Been looking forward to the interview with this legend all week. Me too. Congrats on all the success, Mr. Williams, and absolutely stunning Broken Binding covers. Navigator's Children next week. Yes, we will get to that. Yes. Thank you so much, Enoch. Let me see some other wonderful comments. Don't want to miss any. Let's see here. Hello, Mark Anthony. We're good, man. We're here doing the thing. We're having a good time. I'm glad you're here. Senna, so good to see you. A moment in one of your books actually made me call my mom. Wow, that's so cool.
That's so sweet.
Jack. First, you got the pronunciation of Puerto Rico, correcto. Segundo, huge fan here. Every time I read the Osten Ard.
I say it both ways. I'll just make a quick disclaimer, which is that I've told readers for years, don't worry about how you pronounce things, because many of the names and words in my books were actually constructed before I had figured out the rules of the languages of the different cultures. So in many cases, my versions of the names are not technically correct. So asking what the technically correct one is completely pointless. But I say both Osten Ard and Osten Ard, depending. I don't have a preferred pronunciation. It depends, on how Americanized you're going to make it. And that's completely up to the individual.
See, now I'm a physical book lover. I like digital if I'm doing reviews, which of course I'm going to absolutely do it with this book, but just to have the physical book is superior to me. But I also, having the children, because I can't look, if I try to read a sentence, I will read that sentence 476 times, right?
Oh yeah.
So I do audiobooks. And your audiobook narrator, Osten Ard.
Yes.
Osten Ard.
Yes.
It's so good. My wonderful wife popping in. Yay, this is so much fun. Yes, it is. Thank you.
So it's Ashley, huh?
Ashley, yep.
That's my wonderful wife. How are you and your incredible work with all those kids?
All those kids, yeah.
Good on you.
She used to think she couldn't have babies. We proved that theory wrong.
Yeah, it looks like it. How many did you say?
4. Yeah.
That's what I thought. Yeah, 4.
4 in, I think, 5 years. 5
oh,
and a
my
half.
gosh. Ashley, you are a goddess. I'm so impressed.
She is. There's nobody more gangster in my life than her.
Absolutely, I can tell.
All right, so
my wife is very gangster too, but you probably won't ever find that out unless you make the mistake of getting her ticked off at you.
Yes.
In which case you will find out very quickly. But most of the time she's sweet as can be. But yeah, when she gets grumpy with somebody, it's not pretty.
I get it. I love that though. It's a strong woman, right?
Absolutely.
I'm glad that you brought Deb up, because she has been so wonderful getting things coordinated. It's like she's done this before. I just wanted to shout out that I think you guys have a wonderful system. You guys work together as a team, and I think that's so good.
I am completely and utterly indebted to how much she has done. And it was, not only did I fall in love with her, which obviously was the prerequisite for getting married to her, but I also was extremely smart on some subconscious level to marry somebody who is as knowledgeable and savvy and good with the business as she is. So yeah. No complaints whatsoever. Because as I said, she was my British publisher. So she has that whole wealth of experience of her own that she can bring to bear. She was a damn good publisher too.
So she grew up in the UK?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So now she's in America.
She is British. She's been, we moved back to the States. I lived with her there in London for several years. We moved back to the States in the mid 90s for a variety of reasons, mostly having to do with my family and wanting to have kids here in the States where they would have lots of relatives around them. And so she continued working and publishing for a while, but she's mostly been doing her own kinds of business ever since. So,
wow. That's
I mean, it's just been a really good combination.
Patrick, man, this I can't imagine Tad hearing this, or just kind of being in your seat, Tad, and just to see this kind of comment. Hi, Tad. I was 14 when Dragonbone Chair came out, and it's really been such an inspiration to me. Now, The Last King, it feels like I've grown with Simon. I can't imagine after all those books, Patrick, because look, just after book 1 in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, I feel like I'm very close to Simon. So I can't imagine your experience. I will eventually be there, but that's incredible.
that was very much part of the Navigator's children's series. Obviously, The Witchwood Crown was the first book, was very much part of it. When I was I've always been resistant to sort of going back over old territory, but with not telling the whole long story. But the short version was I had to find a way before I could even consider writing more stories in the same universe. And I suddenly realized, this is all the stuff we've been talking about, Matthew. It was at the time, it had been almost 30 years since I had written the original Dragonbone Chair. And one of the reasons I was saying initially as a reason I couldn't write more was, I've changed so much, since I wrote those books. I've been divorced. I've been remarried. I moved to England. I came back. We've had kids, this, that, the other thing. All these years have passed. And I suddenly thought, oh, well, maybe if I use that same focus on the characters from the first set of books, and it also is 30 years later, all of a sudden I've got just with that fact, I've got a whole wealth of things to write about instead of just continuing the story from where it ended in the previous, in the ones you're reading now. So I won't tell you more than that about it, but it basically, that's what kicked the whole thing off. So I've grown with those characters too. And that's what I really realized when I came back to Osten Ard after all those years, was, oh, they're still inside me. And in a way, they've been growing along with me, and I see them slightly differently now. I'm not still with the same affection, or if they're the bad guys, the same disgust, but maybe with more understanding of certain things. I don't know.
Sure. No, I think that's very, very understandable, because relationships change in life. Relationships change in the way that people work. Your work is character in world. So I can imagine that that's very profound. But
and relationships change with ourselves as well, which is super important as we get older. I mean, I'm not a different person, but I definitely have layers that I didn't have when I was 25 or 30 and first starting out in the writing business. And I'm now approaching 70. And I've got, I say layers. I mean, you can see it in old snake skins kind of, but they're not all useless layers. There are many interesting, useful things that I have assembled on top of the original Tad over the decades. So I mean, that's another important thing, is how do these characters see themselves, and how has that changed? Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I love that, because the only thing I was going to say is I reached out to a guy I really admire. He wrote these and so many others. You may have heard of him, Stephen Orion. So I reached out to him and only him, for a question, because he comes up with these very, very intricate, deep, and he's been a fan of yours for a very long time, to where I'm just loving my introduction so much, and I'm going to savor everything else. He's been in this world. He's been there. He knows you a lot better through your prose than I do. And I wanted him to come up with a question, and it's going to relate a lot to what you just said. And that's the only thing. So I'll bring it up here in a little bit, but wow, cool. How close he knew what to ask, man. So let's see over here.
And by the way, thanks, Patrick. Patrick, about the saying they've grown with Simon. I appreciate that. That's very much what I'm hoping for. So thank you for your comment.
That's got to be so incredible. All right, so let's start back at the beginning a little bit. When and who and how did you find this burning passion for literature? And also, in the same question, who or what books kind of drove you to be a writer? I know that's a loaded question.
No, it's not a loaded question for me, because I grew up, especially my mom, but in a book-oriented and reading-oriented family. The interesting thing, or at least seems interesting to me, is that I did not by any means set out to be a writer, although writing, I did it in school and all that stuff, and apparently used to do funny little stories for people, because when I go to reunions or read my old yearbook, there's like always this, keep up your writing. I don't actually remember doing it particularly, but I guess because I was doing lots of different things. And that was how I started. I always knew I wanted to make things in a creative sense, and perhaps to share them with other people, because I'm not probably the kind of artist who just wants to make the thing and then I'm off to the next. I want people to interact with the things I make. And hi, Tosh. I see your hello there. But as a result, I was spread fairly thin. I dropped out of college very early. I mainly I was doing music, theater, radio, art. I was doing cartooning and illustration and stuff. And the writing actually came fairly late as I got into my 20s, and it was harder and harder to coordinate things or to find things where I could be doing theater with a bunch of people, or, playing in a band. And then if somebody had a crisis, then no rehearsal this week. And so I started working on writing on the side as something I could do after I got home from one of my 2 or 3 jobs I had to have at any given time. And then I was fortunate enough to sell my first book, which was Tail Chaser's Song, the cat fantasy. And the publishers said, "You want to write some more?" And, no idiot me. This was the first thing that I had made work beyond a very minor kind of sense in terms of earning any money off of it. And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And then that next book was The Dragonbone Chair. So it was very much a case of me kind of stumbling into this path out of a more generalized, I have a creative urge, which I do, and it's all kind of storytelling based, but it could have gone a number of different ways. And it wound up being writing books, which again is not a shock, because I was one of those people who was formed by the books I read when I was young, or that were read to me by, my mom especially. And as a matter of fact, since you asked me about what my formative books were, at the moment, I've been reading a few of those on my reading thing that I do Sunday nights and Sunday evenings, or rather late Saturday night, early Sunday morning for the European crowd, and Sunday evening.
Oh, wow.
And because of that, I had spent the first 4 years, I pretty much read everything that I felt comfortable reading on the air of mine. So I've been reading a few books that were special to me. And at the moment, I'm most of the way through The Sword and the Stone by T.H. White, which is, of course, part of his Once and Future King, about the legends of Arthur. Wonderful book, very influential on the Dragonbone Chair. But there were even earlier ones, and a lot of them were English children's fantasies, like the animal fantasies, like when I was a little kid, Winnie the Pooh and Wind in the Willows, but then a little bit later, like the E. Nesbit books and stuff. And then I discovered science fiction and fantasy. First, my mom gave me The Fellowship of the Ring when I was about 11. And that was, talk about falling in love. I completely fell into that, and it became super important in my life. But also Ray Bradbury, especially the Martian Chronicles. And a little bit later on, I discovered some of the other pre-Tolkien fantasy writers like E.R. Edison and Mervyn Peake, and some of these people, William Morris, and, and similarly, other more science fiction-y guys and horror writers like Lovecraft and people like that. And so, it just kind of spread out from there. But it was always, I always loved the otherworldliness of fantasy and the invention of fantasy, that world building thing, which has become so much a part of my work. And that's, of course, one of the reasons that The Lord of the Rings just slayed me, because it felt so much like a real place, a place you could dive into and stay for a long time. And even though from a strictly economic point of view, there are really a lot smarter things to do than to write super long books that sell for the same price as a normal length novel. The fact is that I started out writing these, and my readers liked them. And I do like not just the length, but I like the way that unexpected things rise up out of, the sort of, the seeming chaos of writing a really long story. Well, it's not all chaos. There's order underneath. If it's my subconscious, if it's a muse from ancient Greece, I have no idea. I suspect it's my subconscious, but it's, there is order in these big books, that if you give them some freedom, but you treat the things you've created with honesty, and you don't try to bend them too much to fit into a slot. So there's a number of reasons, but it all kind of traces back to that love of, really Pooh Corner and Rat's house down by the river in Wind in the Willows, and, all the Narnia and Middle Earth and all these other places.
Wow. That's a very complex place to start from. And I think I say complex because of one of the things I wanted to share with you. I was in a hospital bed. I've been sick for a little while, off and on. Not anymore. I'm doing well.
Okay.
But when I found reading, there was a reason I reached out to reading for help, because I was laying, you know what I mean? I needed that escape.
Mm.
And at 29, I'm 34 on the 14th. So not very long. But there's nothing else in my life. There's my wife, there's my children, and then there's literature that brings me giddiness, right?
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is I'm just so thankful to have that foundation, even though it wasn't maybe as early as a lot of the people that I talk to, like yourself, or I found it still.
It really doesn't matter, Matthew. I mean, honestly, whatever brought you to it. My wife has a favorite saying that she picked up from somewhere else, and I'm kicking myself. I can't remember the original quote or who it was from, but basically what we built our adult life around and our family life and stuff. And that is ideas, not things. That's what Deb always says. And that's what happened to you. You discovered that you fell in love with ideas, and that's, once that happens to you, you don't go back.
Oh, as you can see behind me, it does. Like, this is, by the way, this is like my 5th interview with my actual bookshelf. I used to do the green screen thing. We finally built a building.
Yeah.
It's so nice to like be all in one room, right?
Yeah.
And boy, are they heavy though.
I know.
Construct those shelves a few times.
We feel, those, I can't remember the name of the company right off the top of my head, but when maybe it's pods, but you get one of those big moving pods that looks essentially like a portable classroom or something. I mean, they're big rectangular long things. We filled 2 of those to the tune of 4 tons with books in our last move, or a previous to last move. So I hate to say it, but I actually had to get rid of some book. We had to move twice last year for various complicated family reasons. Nothing bad, well, except for losing my parents, but nothing bad to us personally in terms of the moves. But it was not a lot of fun. But I actually had to get rid of some of my books. I had so many old reference books and stuff from like 60 years ago about ancient Egypt and stuff. And I just said, how many years can I carry this around? And I had the very real lesson of my folks just passing and us having to clear out their house. Do I really want to make my kids have to get rid of a ton of unnecessary books that they will never look at? And and they're not rare, they're just they were.
No, I get it. It's like once I subscribed, I don't know if that's the right word, I didn't really subscribe. It just, my heart took me to, it's like, hey, this story sounds amazing. I have to have it on the shelf because I'm going to get to it. Now this story, I have to get to it. Yeah. And once you've moved it, and I only moved it maybe 70 feet from my house to this 20 by 12 or 20 by 16 building.
Right.
And even that small distance made me reconsider buying every book that I'll buy from here on out.
Believe me, I get. Well, you can see that the very bare walls and stuff behind me. We've been back in here for 6 months at least now, probably longer, and I still don't have my bookshelves and pictures and stuff back up. And part of that is just there's so many books and things that still have to be hauled around. It is the downside of modern life. You start to accrue things, and that's why I keep reminding myself, ideas, Tad, ideas, not things.
Yes, I love that. But it's good to also hear that bug kind of bites us all as book lovers, that we kind of start buying up books.
Yeah.
This is the first, by the way, you talked about Lovecraft. I just picked this up, the horror omnibus. I haven't read one single story by Lovecraft, and I'm just pumped to dive into this. But
he is not one of the world's great prose stylists. He was a bit overheated in terms of how he wrote. And he has a few tendencies which even the people who loved his work will say, I could do without that. But the ideas astounding, the aura of mystery and cosmic depths and threats and stuff like that, brilliant. There's a reason that people still read those works.
Just kind of like going, kind of complimenting what you said. I've only started, which is the first short story in here, and it's called The Alchemist. And he's describing this wall of a castle, and I feel like I'm there, within the first 4 or 5 sentences. So I can totally understand where like maybe those ideas and the atmosphere, whatever it is that is influential about his writing is starting to seep into me. So that's fun.
Yeah.
But now that we're 35 minutes into the conversation, I had to throw this bad boy up there. Jeff Brown, man.
Yeah.
Jeff Brown is
beautiful covers, aren't they?
Oh, well, you know, I love a dust jacket because I'm obsessed with covering all my important books with Mylar, which kind of sucks for picture taking, but I don't care. I'm protecting them bad boys. But then to be able to take the dust cover off, what is this? That is just out of this world, man.
Isn't that?
Like, it's just incredibly beautiful, along with it's representing the story just like I would imagine I would have tried to.
Yeah.
These artists and typography people and formatters are just out of this world good. And then to cap it off, that.
Yeah.
That just is a bold statement.
Isn't that gorgeous? I have been extremely lucky in the illustrations and covers and stuff for my books over the years. I mentioned Michael Whalen earlier, who, when I first got involved with science fiction and fantasy, Michael had won so many awards. Like, he won the Nebula and Hugo as best artist so many years in a row. He literally had to take, it was his choice, but he literally took his name out of the voting so someone else could win for once. He won like 6 or 7 years in a row.
Oh my God.
So I had a bunch of his covers on my first 6, 7, 8 books. And I've had all kinds of other really fine artists since. And, this edition is gorgeous. So yeah, I've been really lucky that way.
Now, the cover that I put on our thumbnail, the yellow green, is that Whalen?
That's Whalen. And
one
of the interesting things about that is that's the hardcover cover. And what he did, in part because of him and I talking about it, was that it starts with a framing device around the picture of a parchment, because there's an old poem stroke prophecy in the Dragonbone chair, which you will either found out about already or you will find out about.
Yeah.
And then as the books go on, this is the hardcover American editions, the Stone of Farewell and then To Green Angel Tower, the parchment starts to burn away at the edges, So there's actually that yellowy bit is all pristine in the first fall on Dragonbone chair.
I'm so sorry. I have to look at it now.
Oh, no. Okay. So this is the paperback version.
Yeah,
I thought, okay, this is the paperback version, and the picture in the center, the Dragonbone chair, that's from the original hardcover, but then the hardcover had a parchment frame around it with writing on it. So sorry, I went and described something that unless people have the hardcover, they can't even see.
Oh,
don't worry about it. You can find it online, folks.
Oh, man.
If you want to see Michael's original.
I love that old, and of course, this is all very new to me, what that means to say Michael Whalen's kind of old type of look that he had. Now, tell me if I'm wrong. It's the same avenue as the Wheel of Time. Just kind of like those.
What it very much is, and what was going on, particularly in the 70s and 80s, as the market took off in the wake of Tolkien's success, the market for epic fantasy began to also move more into something that I would call representational covers, where readers actually expected to see pictures of the characters on the cover. So that's more of a marketing thing. And one of the reasons that Michael's work, for instance, was so good is because he could show you the characters without making it just a character thing. He could give you details and other stuff that made you feel like, oh, it's a story and this character is in it and I want to find out what's happening.
I am so glad you said that, because I get that exact same feel from these. That I know when this happens, I see where he is and what tower that is.
Yeah.
It's like, I've read that. Like, I know what that represents. And is that kind of what you mean by somebody looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I mean by representational, in the sense that it's actually trying to show you the artist's impression of something from the book. Whereas we are starting to slide back now into a more non-representational kind of thing.
Symbolic.
Yeah, symbolic and oftentimes almost abstract in some
Yeah.
cases, or just with a kind of a symbol, or as you said, or a logo or whatever. It's one of the things that, although I have been very involved in my covers over the years, because my American publishers have always asked me, and because I have an art background, I love doing it. But I'm pretty much, when they make a decision as to what they think best markets the books, I almost never argue with it, because that's not my sphere. I don't know what really sells books. I know what I like, but I'm probably not, the normal reader that they're trying to attract, especially because I've actually written the books. So, I've got that investment in them. But yeah, so it's changing, and it has changed. But yes, the style that was used on The Wheel of Time and all those other 70s and 80s books, the Thomas Covenant books, and Guy Gabriel Kay's books, and even Ursula Le Guin. I mean, a lot of those 70s and 80s fantasy and science fiction writers were very representational, and that's been changing for the last decade or two.
As everything kind of does, right?
Yeah,
it kind of just goes in, whether it evolves into something new, it'll come back to how it was, and back and forth.
Well, and all of this stuff, and I mean, this, Matthew, all of this stuff is about the interface between the art side of fiction and the commercial side of literally selling books. And that's what brings
me to that book.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons I try to let the publishers do what they do, and they try to let me do as much as I can what I do, and that's one of the reasons I've been with my American publisher since 1985, because we have that relationship where, we trust each other.
I was going to say, that sounds like a relationship in which is valued, because you're letting them do what they were hired for. You're doing what you were hired for, and not being a block in somebody's creative way, or what they feel will best represent your work, which I feel like would be hard, because you created this work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's commendable.
And maybe once or twice in my getting to be quite a long career, have I ever said, I really don't think that's a good choice. And, most of the publishers, and especially my American publishers, as I said, with this long relationship, most of them know me well enough now to know that I'm not going to say anything unless I'm really not down with whatever they're doing there. And they'll usually respect that, and we'll have a long conversation, and usually it winds up with a different approach. So, like everything, it's like the squeaky wheel after a while gets ignored. But if you only squeak when you need to, then, there's a better chance they'll listen.
I like that. Only squeak when you need to. Yeah. Isaac, my buddy, self-pub author. My question: since your stories are sprawling with multiple characters and ideas, what does your outlining process? And this leads into my next question, why I threw it up. And E.L. Monsky threw it up beforehand as well. What does your outlining process look? Well, he's assuming you're an outliner. I was going to ask, are you a pantser or an outliner? But if you are an outliner, which I feel like he may know, look like, and what tips might you have for those also working on sprawling stories?
Well, using George R.R. Martin's definition of pantsers, and I think that his term is architect. I believe, but I have to be both, and I'll give you a quick explanation of why. It's if I'm writing a single novel, like I have done a few times, War of the Flowers, Tail Chaser Song, any of those, I can do anything I want to, because I know before the book is published, I can go back and re-edit the whole thing to make any changes make sense, right? Okay. If you start with this idea that this character is going to do such and such, and you get to the end of the book and you realize that character is not going to do such and such, and therefore I have to scramble around and change things. If it's a single volume and you haven't published it yet, no problem, easy peasy. However, I have primarily written multi-volume stories, and those multi-volume stories, by the time the last volume is coming out, the first volume has often been out for 4 or 5 years or something. And in the case of these Osten Ard books, because there are tie-ins back to the earlier books in the Witchwood Crown series, those books have been in print for 30 or plus years, and people are like fiercely defensive about them, so you can't go back and change anything, but especially in the current work in progress. If I get to the ending and realize I've made a mistake, I'm out of luck. You know, if those books are published. My joke was always, you know, I'd have to go door to door and fix them with a red pen, you know, just not dead, just breathing shallowly. That's my joke. But because of that, I have to do both. I have to think in an outlining sense about the major beats of the story within my ability to imagine them all the way to the ending, because I have to treat, say, a 4 very long book saga like the current one as a single volume, in the sense that I have to be laying in clues or you know, sending up little smoke signals through the first volumes that pay off by the ending. So I cannot be totally ignorant about the ending when I am beginning or in the early stages. But again, I started this most recent series back in 2014, I believe. So I've been working on this for 10 years. Mm-hmm. A lot has changed with the story and my ideas and the world since that point. And as a result, I need to stay open to that. And you can't plan all those things at once, because writing a book is a journey like the journey the characters are going through, where you learn new things and you find new people. And, you know, so I have to stay open to that to keep it fresh and to keep it exciting. And also because you can't write a really long story all at once. You have to discover parts of it as you go. So there's a kind of, I oftentimes liken it to being a tightrope walker, where you cannot go too far to one side or the other. You know, you're carrying this balance beam, and you just have to keep, once you start to go this way, you got to go back the other way. You plan, but you leave enough vagueness when you put it into the book that you can change the meaning slightly if you have to. You think certain characters are going to do certain things, but you can't always rely on it. You have to be ready to draft another character. It's one of the reasons I have so many damn characters. You know, you have to be able to draft another one in and go, well, I know this one's going to do it instead. So there's a great deal of adjustment on the fly. I do outline, and I keep track sort of chapter by chapter of what characters and plot lines I've used, but I don't tend to do too much outlining once I've done the initial outline, and I don't even look at it, to be honest with you.
Oh, wow.
Now it doesn't do me any good, because it's once it starts to change, it is, you know, it is now a record of what I thought was going to happen. It is no longer the guide. I've what's the word? I've internalized most of the information of what I was planning to do, but it's in here now.
Sure.
And for me, and this is probably not true of all writers, but it's certainly true of me, I do better carrying most of it in my head, because that way it doesn't feel set. Whereas to write things down, even if it's first draft, it begins to feel more set. And it's harder to change in my mind. Whereas if it's just in my head, I can lie on my back, which I spend a lot of time doing, thinking about what I'm going to work on next. And I can sort of, do you know what an old-fashioned telephone switchboard used to look like?
Yeah.
IBX, with all the different cords going to all the different jacks. Because I worked on one of those back when, you know, when I was doing all my jobs before I started writing. That's kind of the metaphor that's in my head. That's what I see. And I feel like I'm plugging and unplugging all these different bits and pieces of what could happen to see where they lead, right? Oh, okay, well, if this character does that, and these characters do this, and these characters go over here, and then I'll stop and I'll think that all through. And then I'll realize, oh, mistake, that won't work because of blah, blah, blah. And I can pull them all out again and rearrange. Whereas once they get written down, even if it's only in a first draft, they are harder in my mind to mess with. So I like to stay, it's funny to talk about one's own head this way, but I like to stay fluid. I like to stay fluid inside.
As somebody who is, I would love to write. I would, just for my personal joy of it. And I know that's something I aspire to do. I don't have no expectations for it, but just based off of what you've said and how I've become to learn more about how I think I need to write, let me know if this is accurate. You give yourself a fluid destination where you have thought about maybe where it's going to end, but also not limited yourself by such tiny, or what is the word? You haven't given yourself, or you haven't shackled your arms with the limitations that hardcore outlining would have.
That is absolutely right. That's well put. For Isaac, I guess it is, who asked about outlining tips. Let me try and put it in my sort of process in a more compact form. When I'm writing a story, a big story, I tend to see it almost like somebody standing on a hillside, looking out across a hilly landscape, and I can pick certain hills and say, those are the points that I want to reach on my journey to the far side. So I know that this is going to happen, and this tragedy is going to happen here, and that's going to be a motivator. And over here, there's going to be some conflict that will change things afterward, and et cetera, et cetera. So I see these individual destinations, but all the valleys and lowlands between those hilltops are full of fog. And that means I can choose whatever route to go to them, and I can decide what order and how those things are going to work. And in some cases, I can actually change those hilltop destinations if I get to that point and go, I don't like that now. But the main thing is that way I can see the general shape of what's ahead, both in a short-term sense while I'm writing, and in a long-term sense in terms of how I'm planning the whole story, so that I can start foreshadowing and giving out clues and doing all that stuff. So that's how it feels. It feels like I can see the certain points along the way that I want to get to, but that I've left myself with fog in between them, so that I will have to discover that route myself.
Wow. Yeah. That built like a 3D model of the, yes, I love that, man. In my head, I can totally vision that. Man, I feel like we just were on the same wavelength, because I needed that. I needed that picture visually in my head.
It's because we've got the same haircut, Matthew.
We go to the same barber. I know it.
Absolutely.
I don't know about you, but I was like 17. I had to start shaving. My DNA was like, look, dude, you're not gonna have hair for.
Yeah, no, same way. I think I was in my late 20s when it started to disappear. But it's so funny because I lost my hair early, and I've got all kinds of weird joint issues and inflammation stuff. And so I was just like laughing at like all my friends who started, they turned 40 or 50, and they're like, oh my God, I'm getting old. I'm going like,
get over it.
That crap happened to me 30 years ago. Like, I'm so past that. I've been old a long time. So.
It's like, I used to think my buddies were just messing with me. And like, dude, you're bald. And I'm like, you're just, no, they weren't playing. They was trying to be real good friends.
Yeah, but see, I'll tell you what my mom and my wife both said to me. You have a good shape of head.
Yes, you have to.
That does make a difference. That does make a difference.
Brother, we're rocking the egg-shaped head. We had to.
We are.
Hey, look, if you've got one of them old Cheerio heads.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're out of luck, bud.
Yeah, exactly.
Buy a fedora.
That's wonderful.
So I love that inside kind of look that you gave us to the way that you plot out stories. And I can imagine with, a Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, like how broad, us as readers who haven't written yet, it's like, and Isaac's written. So it's from my perspective, it's a feat, but it can't be this big feat from what I hear, especially from what you just said, done all at one time. It's not like you have to put everything in concrete. You have to give yourself those give and take areas.
Absolutely.
To reach the finish line.
Absolutely. And there's another important thing to think about, which goes with that, which is that in my experience, although some readers will sit down with a new big book and just charge right through it, by and large, when readers, especially new readers, are picking up a work like that, they're not reading the whole thing. They're reading as long as they're interested, right?
Yeah.
So even if you're writing a 1,300 whatever page book, if you have to wait 500 pages before the interesting stuff happens, or you start to get answers or whatever, a lot of readers are never going to get to that point. So I also have this habit of trying to, I refer to it as the falling down stairs method. I have this thing where I try to give people a push at the top of the stairs at the end of every chapter, regardless of which plot line it is. It doesn't have to be that. I mean, it's not like somebody tries to kill somebody or something, but I mean, you hand them some new information and then you move on. And the hope is that you keep the readers falling forward, as it were. And even though they don't get to find out what that thing meant, by the time they start the next chapter, they're like, oh, but this is the one from before where I also wanted to find out what was happening, right? And so you keep putting stairs under them and keep giving them little shoves. That's my plan anyway.
I wanted to say too, like before I read this, the Dragonbone Chair, and I had only heard reviews and stuff like that from people, I got two different things. I absolutely loved it, like the way that I feel about it, or it was a little too slow for me, which attracted to, at the moment, they probably didn't expect that review, but that's an example of a review that brought me to it, because a slow burn, and I want to know your opinion of the work. It's like, do you consider your work sometimes a slow burn? Because what that says to me is character, world, and plot development in which I can empathize and grow with and stay with for a long time, where some people are like, I'm bored.
Yeah.
Like,
I made a calculated decision with the Dragonbone Chair that I have never made in quite the same way since. And that was that I want people to feel not just that they know the world, but I want the people to feel that they know the cultural mindset that the main characters come from, especially Simon, because he's kind of the everyman character. For those of you who haven't read the book, Simon is a young kitchen boy who gets caught up in big important events and et cetera, et cetera.
I think Rachel does a good job of giving him like, I think she tells about his character a lot.
Absolutely.
Maybe sometimes more than he does himself.
Absolutely. But as a result of wanting to, I knew that the world was going to go through some serious changes, war, sorcery, the whole bit. So I very much wanted to do, in a way, what Tolkien did, which was to try and ramp up the suspense, but not start the story, because when the story starts, that's when things start falling apart. But I wanted people to have some idea of what the world was like and how people thought about the world before everything started to change. Now, that said, I too know that a lot of people were scared off by that fairly slow first thing. And for those of you who haven't read it but are interested in maybe reading it, I'll tell you, everything blows up starting in chapter 12. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I'm telling you this is because it does start slow. I don't think that's an unfair criticism, especially by today's standards. I was going more in the Tolkienian mold and in the mold of other writers that I had come to love and respect. But I think in some ways, I think I have started my books deliberately a little faster since then, especially the long ones, because of the fact that I was doing that for a reason. I don't feel like I have to keep doing that every time. And I did respond to the fact that a lot of people who might have otherwise liked it, if they'd known, quit before they got to the point where the fireworks start.
Yeah.
So, it's something that I don't think I would go back and change anything now, but it was definitely something that I changed a little bit along the way, because I did get that feedback from the more, I don't want to say impatient class of readers, because that puts them in a negative, but readers who were not enjoying the slow burn that you're talking about.
I think what it does, though, is allow me to say, as a reader, that Tad Williams writes character and world developed, ideal and theologically developed stories, in which by the time that I've had such a wonderful time meeting and getting to know what I'm getting into as far as a story that I know is, at least from my point of view, I know that this is a long, wonderfully long, I'm so glad it is, adventure. And that's something I value. I absolutely love that part. And now I just believe there's a time where, I enjoy an action-filled book, but when I grab a fantasy book, especially something like a classic feel and epic fantasy, that is what I am looking for. And I think so many people agree with that.
Well, it absolutely. And if you had to pick one thing that describes why people like epic fantasies or big fantasies, I think just what you're talking about, which I would call, say, immersion, the complete immersion into the world is, because let's face it, there are times when the world we live in, no matter where we live, feels scary. If we're lucky, it only feels scary.
Sure.
For some people, it's a lot worse than that. But but one of the things that draws us to these books is the chance to get out of our own world for a while. And that was certainly what seized me with books like The Lord of the Rings that grabbed me. And so, yeah, that's very much a hallmark of this kind of fiction. And it's really interesting. It's developed as its own whole subgenre, which is pretty much a genre now of its own. And so clearly there are readers to whom that is one of the chief virtues of this kind of book.
Very clearly. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Real quick, I want to shout out Senna. Thank you so much. I knew Chad wasn't going to throw any spoilers. She was so worried she was going to get spoiled. She's starting the Dragonbone chair in December. Say, come on.
The only spoiler is that the real crazy stuff starts to happen in chapter 12. But that's, that there's other things that happen before then. Believe me, there are murders and treachery and all that other stuff. And in-house
you get
history.
to know the characters. Oh,
Yeah.
that's it. In the hierarchy feel of how certain people are. You'll get it when you get there. I don't want to say, I'm not going to do that to you, Senna.
I'm so glad people are still talking about. I mean, what a pleasure that people are still talking about things that I wrote back in the 1980s. I can't tell you how thrilling it is to still have some kind of relevance after all this time.
Oh man, that's got to feel so cool. And thank goodness, because I'm telling you, like, again, I'm new, but to finally be in the realm, like I hear so many people, oh yeah, that was foundational for me, and I get to read that for the first time. Like I feel lucky.
Yeah,
it's like it makes up for those times where I feel like I'm not in the right room. So Natasha too, Joyce, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
And Grimfell, thank you so much. I love the OG cover too, man. All right, so let's talk about your upcoming release. And specifically, let's do it this way, if you don't mind. Like, let's give somewhat of a synopsis, and also for those who aren't as far with your work, such as myself, and those who are just kind of starting out. Where does this tie in as far as the entire story? When do we, you kind of get what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the first thing to realize, I mentioned earlier, which is this takes place approximately 30 years after the ending of 2 Green Angel Tower. Now, there's also a couple of things that are of interest that also go with these big books. I did 2 short novels, one called Brothers of the Wind, the other called The Heart of What Was Lost. The Heart of What Was Lost is literally a bridge book. Now, you don't have to read these. I'm just mentioning this for completeness' sake. Okay. The Heart of What Was Lost is literally a bridge book between the end of 2 Green Angel Tower and some of the characters that become important, most notably the Norn characters, who are the pale fairies of the north, who are very unpleasant for the main characters. So it takes place about 30 years after. The main difference is that now the Norns are no longer just a fearsome other race like orcs or something, that they are a people that we get to know and we spend time with in these books. And we begin to see them in a little more complexity, although what they are doing still obviously is of great concern and danger to the main characters. As far as the characters themselves, especially the human characters, many of them are the main characters from Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. So we meet Simon and Miriamel 30 years later. We see lots of others from the first books, but we also meet new characters. And again, I don't want to give too much away for those who haven't finished the first books yet, but there are many characters who show up again, albeit 30 years on in their lives. And Simon and Miriamel are still ruling Osten Ard, or at least the part of Osten Ard that they are in charge of. But as of course, as is going to happen in a book like this, things are starting to happen that are frightening and disturbing. And they do center around the Norns, and specifically the deathless Norn queen, who is the longest lived thing on the planet. Although they don't think of it as a planet, obviously, but she is, thousands and thousands of years old. She shows up in the Dragonbone Chair books, Utuku, the Queen of the Norns, and she is very definitely a major antagonist in these books. But we also, again, not only do we get to follow the old characters, but we follow some new characters now, some related to Simon and Miriam L, some not. And I like to think that certainly the feedback so far has been that the characters do feel like the same characters, just older sometimes. And that, you will also find some new characters to care about and some new characters to be scared of, I hope, because I think that's a big part of fantasy too, is the weird, scary stuff. And actually, that's another thing we were talking earlier about the signals of what is epic fantasy. Horror and beauty, which are beyond our normal earthly ken, as one might say, beyond what we know in the real world. Horror and beauty in fantasy are both really important because, again, that's something that we can imagine in a fantastic universe, but never actually experience in the real universe. So anyway, besides those 2 short works, there's what would have been about the same length as Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. It's 4 volumes. That's what Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn wound up being, although I published the last volume as a single horrifyingly large hardcover book, but then it had to be split in paperback. So this time I just said, it's going to be 4. I thought I might pull it off in 3, but I failed again. So even the last book here is still pretty long, but it's 4 volumes. The Witchwood Crown, Empire of Grass, Into the Narrow Dark, and The Navigator's Children. And The Navigator's Children is the one that's just coming out now, which will answer all the questions, even some you may not have realized, and deliver a lot of, I hope, surprises, and some good, some bad, for the readers, just in the sense that they're invested in the characters.
Sure.
But I think that's pretty much all I can say without giving away too much, and especially being conscious of the fact that you're still reading the first set of books. So I don't want to take away your incentive to find out what happens by.
Oh, well, I highly appreciate that because I'm very excited. But what I'm even more excited as I listen to you is your authentic feel of how much fun that I feel you have doing this, man. I feel like it's something that is so important to you and the readers that you've touched over the years, being an experience and influence in their lives, whether it was for a minute or for the entire duration of your bibliography, right?
Absolutely.
That I can see is important to you. And I think that's an important thing to take out of somebody, especially when we look up to, I know for me, a reader, an author is like a superhero to me. And I can just imagine a guy like you who's written so many wonderful books for people to say, hey, this is my foundation. This is why I was inspired to do this or that. I guess what I'm just saying is that it's translated through the way that you talk about your work and those who have read it.
Well, thank you. I just actually sent out a newsletter. We hadn't sent one out for months and months. I just sent out a newsletter, and the last part of the newsletter, when I was kind of summing up the future, what was ahead, I just said, the only thing I can promise you for certain, because there's things I don't know, but the only thing I can promise you for certain is that I will never put out a book that I did not love writing, because it's too much damn work, for one thing. I mean, if you're not loving a 1,300 page book or 1,000 page book or an 800 page book or whatever it is, if you're not loving it, man, that's a slog. But if you are like me and you are both fascinated by the characters and wanting to see what happens to them, and be fascinated by the readers and wanting to see if they have the experience that you want them to have, then, it's a no-brainer. You make the best thing that you can make, because, I hope I live for another 100 years or 2. I kind of doubt it, but, I'd be willing to. But the thing is that the chances are good, unless I really suffer a complete collapse of popularity, that there'll be some of my books left after I'm gone, and I want people who never knew me to read those books and feel like we have a connection. And I think that's when, you remember when I said earlier that, like, I'm not the kind of writer who just wants to make a piece of art and then I've satisfied what was in me. No, I have a performing background. I want to share these things with people. And so when readers tell me that they've had a good experience, or in some cases a really good experience or a profound experience with something that I made, it's the best. It's absolutely the best. So Yeah, that's a big part of my philosophy is never do anything that you'd say afterwards, oh, I wish I'd paid a little more attention. I mean, you can make honest mistakes. We all will. But I never want to make the intentional mistake of mailing something in or, kind of glossing past something. And that's also what people like my wife and my agent and my publishers are very good at, is going, Tad, you kind of weren't really into it the day you wrote this, were you? I go, yeah, all right. Yeah, you're right.
All right. Yeah, you got me.
I'll redo it.
I wanted to throw this up for Deb because I take a lot of these pictures just because I think me and the way that I want my kids to grow up and be influenced by reading and just kind of the picture of innocence. And honestly, just because Deb really loved the picture, I wanted to throw it. This is my boy, Matthew Jr. Holding the big old tome, man.
Nice.
So,
oh my God. He's going to have biceps by the time.
Yeah, man. I was like, you know what? He can hold it for a second. I'm taking a picture of him. That's my man.
Oh, he's a cutie.
So that's the third boy of my three. I have three boys and one girl.
Excellent.
So I wanted to throw that up, man. He's a future Tad Williams enthusiast.
Or maybe a future writer. You never know.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
You never know. I don't think my mom quite realized when she started reading those books to me, all the things she read me when I was young. I don't think she necessarily was thinking, oh, he might be a writer someday, but she sure set me up for it. So,
wow.
Yeah,
that's so incredible too, and something you'll never forget, man. I think has a lot to do with why you are the man that you are, and why you love what you do.
Absolutely.
So I do have a couple more questions. Now I have a lot more than a couple more questions, but what I feel like, if you would be up to it, so I can ask these more questions, maybe another interview, because it'd probably take another 2 or 3 hours, because you and me are on the exact same wavelength. So
I'd be very happy to, Matthew. That
amazing.
That would be no problem.
Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy. But I will get to a couple others real quick, because the few in the middle, they're going to take some time, and I know you have a lot of wonderful things to say.
As you may have noticed, I speak at some length, even when I'm trying to be as brief as I can for an interview. So
there's nothing better for an interview than that.
That may be a good choice, but yeah, absolutely. Ask the ones you've got that are good for now.
Awesome. That's so exciting. So, all right, I'll start here. All right, here we go. I'm trying to decipher which ones I'll ask next time. Here we go. All right. So what does Tad, I know that's not your real name, but what does Tad do for fun?
What does Tad do for fun? Yeah, my real name is Robert. I never use it. It was
a powerful name.
I've never been crazy about Tad, but I like Robert. I like Robert a lot. And
I like how you got the name Tad, though.
Yeah, after the comic strip, after Pogo, which it was. My mom was a big Pogo fan, and they call the little animals in it, because it's that cod Southern dialect in the Okefenokee swamp. And so they call the little animals Tads. Like, there's Ms. Raccoon and her Tads, there's Ms. So-and-so and her Tads.
Now your grandmother, right, gave you that name?
Yeah. No, so is my mom, actually.
Oh, is your mother?
Who loved Pogo, which was a brilliant comic strip. I mean, one of the most beautifully drawn and clever wordplay comic strips of all time, and very smart. But anyway, yeah, if anybody who's interested in the history of comic strip art, that Pogo is way up near the top. But anyway, so yeah, I was just called Tad when I was little, and it stuck. And I honestly, the only time, I've said this many times, the only times I ever heard Robert as a name was either from substitute teachers or later on from telemarketers.
Okay, so you used it a lot even before it was a well-known name. It was used as kind of like every day.
Oh yeah, no. It's since I was, as I said, I don't remember being called anything else. By the time I was old enough to have a concept of what is my name, it was Tad for some reason. So cool. But it never felt quite like me, because I guess I grew up in an America where people named Tad were like people who hung out at the local yacht club or something like that. Like, oh yes, me and Bryce, we're going up to Newport for that. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's a good thinking, Tad.
Yeah.
So it just never felt.
I could never think of Tad that way, though.
Well, I'm glad, because
that is you, man.
It's my name, and I'm glad, that I've had something that has let me out, because also my last name is not super unusual either. So
I think it rings together beautifully.
Well, thank you. I'm very pleased to hear it. But that's so what do I do for fun? Well, up until a few years ago, I was playing a lot of basketball. I have been.
Really? Are you tall?
No. No,
Okay.
no, I'm like average. I'm like 5'10". I'm absolutely average, but I'm a little bit bulky and I can rebound and play inside fairly well. And I love
in the paint.
sports. Yeah, in the paint, got a nice bank shot and stuff like that. I grew up on sports. A lot of people always are surprised when I talk about sports because they're like, "Oh, you seem like a theater guy." I go, "I was a theater guy, but I was also."
That don't mean you can't. Look, man.
Of course not.
If I could go back, I'd do theater, and I'm 6'5", 240 pounds.
Absolutely. Well, see, and if I'd been 6'5", I probably wouldn't have quit playing basketball. No, but so I love sports. I love playing them. I'm not doing them as much. These days I'm doing a lot of house stuff because we moved back into our house and we're doing a lot of work on it and things like that. But really most of what I do is my wife and I are obsessed with science and, with the sciences and with archaeology and cosmology and anthropology and all that stuff. So we watch a lot of stuff like that. One of our kids is still living at home and we've got all the animals and, other than that, and then I just work. I work a lot because I love what I do. And I spend a lot of time, actually, before I ever write each day, I spend an hour or two just thinking about what I'm going to work on. Again, for me, it's having it in the head and being able to play around with it. And then when I'm finally ready to sit down, I usually have a fairly good idea of what I'm going to do. So
I love that. You've got people around you who you love and whom love you and who support and you support. You do things in your life that you are inspired by, like the sciences, which I can totally relate to. I'm a documentary nerd.
Yeah, there you go.
Just love it. And I think what you also said at the end, how you give yourself a moment when you wake up to think about those things you want to write about. Or I think that I can also translate that into things that I have to do today, or rather than just jumping into the day and just everything being chaos and just taking it as it comes.
Yeah.
Free thought kind of brings a little bit of meditation to it and a little bit of reason.
Well, and your brain needs some space to do that kind of stuff. I mean, in my case, when I'm talking about the writing specifically, I'm playing with a lot of complicated things, but I mean, let's face it, just life is complicated and making a list of priorities is complex. And, there's so many different factors. And these days there's so many electronic plugins of various kinds that to perform any task you have to do. I mean, we're just, trying to deal with stuff around the house. I'm like, okay, I got to call this. I've got to look this up. I got to do these. I got to order some of these. I got, and that's like one thing. So you keep thinking, oh, I'll just do this today. No, I can start that today, but then I have to do this. Yeah. So
a realistic factor to the life.
Yeah. You need a little space to kind of let the brain do its work without having things coming at you, and that's my only, I've got nothing against the information age. I'm totally happy with almost all aspects of it, but I do not like the idea that, you're supposed to respond right away to all these different things because, that's like trying to go through a normal life while working in a delicatessen or something,
Yeah, dude.
Like if you were trying to raise your kids while meanwhile people are going, pound of pastrami, please. It would be like,
yes. And so, honestly, that brings a lot of realistics to my day. Like being a modern dad, like there's a lot of times where like I'll be editing a video or what have you, on my phone, and my kid's been trying to get my attention, and those are learning moments, right? And something I'm trying to get better at, but it kind of is telling too. Like if I kind of wake up in the morning, which I don't do, I kind of just, I'm thrown into my day. My wife's the same way. It's very stressful. But if we take a minute to maybe wake up 10, 15 minutes earlier than the kids usually do, and say, hey, here's our plan for the day. And she hears me too. She's going to hold me to this. I know she is. And, to kind of come up with what we hope today brings, and we'll adjust if we have to. Can bring a lot of peace to the mind, if not a lot, some.
Just the chance to think like, and if that doesn't work, then what is like super important, because otherwise you're just standing there going, I have to start over from scratch. The idea that I had, I was going to get done or try to work with, that's gone. And then, you have to try and find the piece to figure out what you're going to do instead. But if you can do that ahead of time and have a few alternate plans, yeah, it's better.
I
And
actually
more,
really like, by the way, it worked out this way. Guys, I want you to know in the chat too, you getting up before the kid. Yeah, my wife already knows. She's like, she hears the first cry and she is up, boom, going. And me, that doesn't happen. I have to like gather my thoughts for a minute.
I understand. Yeah. I understand.
But the way that, and I didn't plan on this, but we've had such a wonderful conversation that we've covered a lot of like those, inspirations, how you started, who inspired you. I have a lot of nitty gritty things like world building and characters. I'm really excited to get to that, but I know I just wanted to say, guys, as long as Tad is good with it, there's going to be a part 2 to this. We will dive into those things.
Yeah, because those are subjects that not only are they complicated in themselves, but then they bring up a lot of sort of zigzagging into other subjects and back and forth, and because that then you're just talking about world building. There's like 10 related subjects like research and things like that go with it, and yeah, science and history and all this stuff that has to be talked about.
And that's the experience I wanted to have with Tad Williams, was to kind of get a lot of those inspirations, how things started, and then dive into those things that were more thematic. And I'm really excited for that. So kind of to cap things off for tonight, because like I said, there's going to be a great part 2 as long as Tad's good with that. What are you currently reading?
What am I currently reading?
Are you a reader during your writing times? Or
I am, although I tend now in my adulthood or my late adulthood, I tend to read a lot of nonfiction, but I do still go back to fiction. I actually have been, because of the situation I'm in my office, where I still have all these unpacked boxes or these packed boxes waiting to be unpacked.
Sure.
I have a lot of my old books that keep surfacing, like a lot of my old paperbacks and things like that. And so not mine personally, not ones I wrote, but, so like I was just reading the famous James Blish story, Surface Tension, which is a science fiction classic. It's a brilliant story. But I also, I've been reading Dorothy Dunnett, who is a fabulous historical fiction writer who wrote what are called the Lyman books, Lymond, Lyman, and her last name, Dorothy Dunnett, Dunnett. Hang on, I've got a bunch of books open on my Kindle, so I can actually open them up and tell you, but I have to now take off airplane mode. So we'll pray that nobody calls me in the next few minutes. And yeah, because I'm also using the Kindle for.
I was talking to Adrian Tchaikovsky. Adrian Tchaikovsky one night, and my kids were behind me having like the biggest meltdown of their life. My camera died. It was just one of those deals, man.
Yeah.
So, it's when you do live interviews, you face those obstacles every now and then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so here's just a few things I've been, and a lot of them are rereads because for various reasons. That's what wound up on my my phone. But the best of Richard Matheson. Matheson, if do you know much of Richard Matheson? Was his son is also a very fine writer. Richard Matheson wrote some of the greatest science fiction and horror stories of all time. Several of them were made into Twilight Zone episodes. One of them has been remade as a movie about 5 times, which is what's it called? It'll come back to me, but it's the one that Will Smith made into a movie that was kind of the opposite of the original. Vincent Price did it. Vincent Price did it also. It's about a guy who's the last human alive, and everybody else turned into vampires.
Legend.
Yeah, I am Legend was Matheson's original story it was based on. So anyway, there's
Patrick's got us. Hell House. I Am Legend.
Yeah, I Am Legend. 1D. So been rereading Theodore Sturgeon and James Tiptree because I was reading stuff that that worked for me. That I want to pass on. I just read a Thomas Pynchon novel, which I had never finished, but I loved, called Vineland. I'm a big Thomas Pynchon fan. I read the book that Poor Things, the movie, was based on, because it was one of Alistair Gray's books I hadn't read. So that's just one. Reading Pedro Paramo, and then everything else practically is all nonfiction stuff about Cornwall and places.
Oh yeah.
Because of the current book I'm working on, not Navigator's Children, but the next book.
Okay.
But I tend to read a lot of nonfiction these days. And so I'm like a terrible person to ask about like, oh, who's a good young writer? And people almost always ask me that on interviews. And I'm always like, I'm so sorry. I am so out of touch with that stuff, you know?
I think that it just like I have to compare what you're saying to something I heard from Joe Abercrombie was I don't read a lot of fantasy or science fiction anymore. It feels a lot like work. And it also will benefit me to read things like which my wife has read. And I've read some of it and she doesn't understand how I start books and I don't finish them because I'm like a mood reader. But Lonesome Dove.
Yeah. Larry McMurtry, brilliant writer.
Oh, and she's like, I don't know. It was her second book. She was very late to reading like me. She read it her second book ever. And I'm like, I don't know. You set the bar very high.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Absolutely fabulous writer. No, and in fact, it's actually something super important. So I'm interested to hear Joe Abercrombie says that too, because one of the things when I'm talking to would-be writers or people interested in becoming a writer at all, especially in a genre like ours, science fiction, fantasy, or whatever, however you want to label it. One of the things I always say to people is, first off, read nonfiction, read history and science. Second of all, don't read very much in the genre that you're interested in, because what matters is what you bring into the genre, not what you take out of it. And I mean, I grew up a comic book guy, big comic book fan. And one of the things that I use as an analog for this is how there will be artists who draw comic books now who have never looked at an artist who wasn't also a comic book artist. Ooh. So they've learned everything they've learned from like 4 generations who are also learning from other comic book artists and not going back to actually drawing real people and things and, you know, vases on desks and all the things you do in early art training. And there's a reason why they teach you to do those things. It's to look at the world and to actually critique your own art based on, you know, what the real world looks like and what it is that you're trying to achieve before you start getting too fancy. And in the same sense, if all you read is genre fiction, in other words, if you want to write vampire novels, which is fine, that's great. But if all you read is vampire novels, then you're going to be just in this kind of little tight circle of ringing the changes on things that other people have already done. Ooh. Whereas if you're reading, let's say, science, and you learn about some incredibly weird type of fish that does some odd thing with its victims, all of a sudden you've got a new interesting detail to bring into your vampire fiction that nobody else has done because they haven't gone outside the genre. Ooh. So that's just a really simple example, but it's like the wider your net that you cast for information and technique and things like that as a writer, the more you will bring in and the faster you will find an individual voice.
I love that because I think it takes personality and individuality to go after your interests. I don't think that staying in one little realm of, let's say, vampire novels is going to expand you as an individual, but train you as what they may, or kind of put yourself in a bubble and limit your possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would never criticize somebody for that. I would never say like, oh, you're writing derivative stuff based on too many other things that were already derivative to begin with, because just writing is a massive victory. You know, even if you're just writing for yourself, it's so useful. It's so interesting. Forcing your thoughts into something that you can put into words, that's like a major work of philosophy right there. So I would never criticize anybody who's trying to write anything, but I would say, if you want to make something new and different, bring something new and different in from outside the genre. I think that's super important.
Tad's got it, man. Oh, I love the way that you put that. It's inclusive and it's like, it doesn't limit. I love that. I love it. I don't really know how to put it in words, but I love what you just did there. And I think that that's an important part to a lot of the different topics that we talk about, like whether it's a reviewer talking to an author or other reviewers, the way that we express ourselves and the way that we could critique things,
there's like, I'll never know enough to be able to do that comfortably. I'll always be learning. And that's why I love what I'm doing right here with a wonderful person like you, Ted.
That's the best attitude, Matthew, that you can have. I mean, one of the things that I've always said that I love about writing is that I will never be good enough to say this, I want to stop now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I will never be that good. There will always be writers who I loved who can do things I can't do and that I can't sometimes even understand how they did them. I will always be learning. I will always have goals ahead of me. And considering that, you know, I probably won't ever retire either. I'll just die out of the field. You know, that's a good thing. I will never be complacent because I know that I will never be good enough to satisfy myself.
So I had never set a goal before, guys. And I feel like from the comments that you guys have said it. So I set a goal today for like shout outs, which equals like this, like little monetary gains. And I think they've hit it, which is going to be a bloopers roll. So that'll be fun. I'm glad there's a bunch of those that I'm going to put together, regardless if we met it or not. But so I'm so glad it kind of happened this way because look, after about an hour and a half, I've got to pee and my brain gets mushy.
The role of the bladder in history,
man. It's like the older I get, the longer or the shorter the time gets where I gotta let's go.
Hey,
but
you're preaching to the choir here, bud.
But I have to say, before we end this, Tad, just the fact that I was able to have the opportunity and humbled to have this time with you, man. I don't really know if I can put it in words, but just the opportunity to talk to a man like you who've just left your impression on fantasy and continue to do so. I just want to say I'm honored, man, and that I'm so thankful for your time. And truly, this is something to remember for me.
Well, thank you, Matthew. All I can tell you is I love doing this. I've enjoyed our interview, and we will do a follow-up and we'll get more granular. We'll get into the nitty-gritty stuff. And it's just up to you to decide when it should be, because I don't have any plans for the next few months that will prevent me from doing it. So just let me know when.
Oh, I'll send you dates tomorrow.
Okay, excellent. And if we're wrapping it up now, then I just wanted to also say, hey, I enjoyed it, and all good luck to you and your young family and your hardworking spouse, who I'm sure is pulling at least
just smiling ear to ear right now.
Yeah, just like mine does with me, and doesn't get to go on the camera and get the nods and the approbation. So we all understand how the world works. And
also tell Deb, I'm sure she watched, but if she didn't, tell her I think she does a wonderful job.
If she isn't watching it now, I will tell her, and I'll tell her that you had nice things to say about how she put it all together. So so thank you for having me.
So guys, I will let you know as soon as we do part 2, because the part 2 is going to be, there's not going to be spoilers. I think somebody misinterpreted that.
No,
but we're just going to kind of dive into character depth and world building, those things that would leave us here for like another 4 hours until midnight my time. He's 3 hours behind my time. He could probably talk that long. I'm going to start.
I have talked that long, but no, reassure your viewers that no, I'm very careful about spoilers myself, and one of the reasons is because, you know, as I said, I've been working on this thing since 2014. People are just getting the new book, so the last thing I'm going to do with any of this stuff is spoil anything, and I'll even be aware of that with older books too. So
I'm just excited, and I know a lot of my viewers are this way. This second one is going to be, like, again, about those elements of writing that are, well, they're going to be very specific to Tad, but also going to relate to anybody who's written themselves, or those like me who want to write, and they can just learn. I said before this interview that I was going to keep my ears open and my mouth shut, and I tried to do that as much as possible. But with this next one, that's what it's definitely going to be. So,
all right. We'll get into the kitchen and we'll see how the sauce is made.
Exactly, man. I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Tad, for being here tonight. All you guys that were here live, you are amazing. Thank you guys so much. For those who watched the replay, put in the comments what your favorite part was. Like, share, subscribe, and we will see you with the part 2 very soon. Y'all have a wonderful night. Tad, have a wonderful night, man.
Absolutely. Peace out.
Bye-bye, guys.